Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I am your host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me today, special but guest, Libby Greiwe. Libby was one of our early guests on the podcast, and you may know her from all of her awesome work on systems and processes. And you can go back and listen to that episode where we talk about how Libby built this great practice. It got way too big and out of hand. Libby, you got up to 5,000 clients at one point? Was that the right number?
2,800.
It's about the same as 5,000.
Feels like
anything over 200, like, I don't know, 1 million. She probably had 1 million
clients. Once you hit a tipping
20,
point, it doesn't even matter.
That's right. Got to 28 clients, pared it way back, eventually sold her practice, and now she helps advisors from her own experience say, hey, but how do we implement systems and processes? So Libby, really excited to have you back on the show. Always love to hear your expertise because it's based on what you really did, not what you think somebody might want to do.
Yeah, right. It's always good to hear from someone who was in the trenches and actually did it in practice versus just in theory. So I'm always glad to talk about it.
I love it. What we'd love to talk about today, there's kind of this, like we're all believers in comprehensive financial planning, right? But sometimes we get caught up in the idea that this means we need to do 37 different things for every client every time they come in. And something that you're really a master of, something you advocate for is, let's narrow this down to themes and variations of a theme. And so that's really what we're going to try to focus on today, plus the inevitable rabbit holes that we'll jump down. So tell us a little bit about in your practice as you work with advisors, how do you find these themes and then variations on those versus trying to do a Money Guide Pro 47-point checklist?
Right. Yeah, sure. So, one of the big questions that anytime I'm speaking somewhere or I'm talking to a group of advisors that I always get asked is, okay, how did you run a $1 million practice working 24 hours a week? Like, how'd you do that? And
just real quick for those listening, that was 24 hours a week, not 24 hours a day, right? That's not
right. Yeah, 24 hours a week.
Okay,
with
just
14
making sure
weeks
everybody
off
heard
a
that.
year. Yes.
Yeah.
111 days to be specific, if you want to get really specific about it. But so that's one of the questions. And for me, it was always, well, how do I not cheapen the experience for my clients? Like, how do I go really, really deep on client experience? How do I become an indispensable advisor to the people that I work with? And a big piece of that, or a big pivot, so really when we became referral only, is really kind of right after we implemented this idea of working in themes. And for us, working in themes did a couple of different things. It allowed us to go really, really deep with clients on a particular topic and actually be able to slow down the financial planning process and take that time to educate and to teach and to let clients absorb, versus what we had been doing previously. Like, we'd kind of been more in a review state, right? Like, they would come in, we'd show them Money Guide Pro, we'd talk about their protection, we talk about their estate plan, we talk about their taxes, we talk about their investments, we talk about their retirement, we talk about income distribution, like we talk about everything. And, the way I kind of described it is we were putting on a snorkel and we were just kind of floating around at the top, like literally looking at everything and talking about all of it, but not getting deep. And when we started charging, so kind of when we moved from free to fee, we started talking about like, okay, well, are we really worth the thousands and thousands of dollars a year? Like, are we actually doing that? And the idea was really, how can we pivot from being like a proactive review? How can we pivot that into being more strategic and actually having more of a strategy for clients moving forward? How can we move from scuba diving to really putting on our snorkeling gear and getting really, really deep on a particular topic? And then creating a theme for the year, which would include agendas for meetings, but then also our value adds, like I know you guys are huge advocates of, supporting that same theme for clients and being able to use education and use value adds to position potential sales opportunities or the opportunity to get more business. And then how do we build out systems and processes that make it super easy to deliver that theme? And when we found we were doing the same thing for everybody, right, it was really easy for the staff and the team to say, okay, here's exactly what we need to do. And it's the same for every single client versus, okay, those clients were doing estate planning, so we need to get their will, their trust, their whatever. And then these clients over here, we're doing insurance, so we need to get this and this from that. Like, being able to do virtually the same thing for all of our clients at the same time throughout the year gave us a very tight pre-meeting process, a very tight agenda, and then a very tight post-meeting process. And then when, we were implementing business, it was the same company. We were doing kind of a lot of the same stuff over and over, which, I know, as we all know, like when you're kind of doing the same thing over and over again, it becomes a lot more streamlined.
Yeah, it really does. And it frees up so much more mental bandwidth to really be with the client in that moment, right? So if we're going to use estate planning as an example on our theme, And so the entire team knows, hey, we need to pull up these documents and we need to have these things ready. We need to check to see if it was notarized, whatever your checklist is. By doing those in a systematic process, right now you can have those deeper discussions like, hey, imagine you're looking down from heaven, your family's having the first Thanksgiving after you've passed away. Like, what do you want to be going on there? We can have those deeper discussions because we've stuck to a theme. So Libby, what are some examples of those themes? Like if you were setting a theme for this year or this quarter, what might one of those be?
Yeah. So I love like an annual theme and then building all of your value adds and content to support that. So let's go with the example you just gave. So let's talk about estate planning. The thing I love about working in themes is that there's so many different lenses that you can look through, even a particular financial planning topic through. So as advisors, when we talk about, adding massive value, how do we do that year over year over year over year? You think, okay, well, there's only so many things we can talk about. Well, not necessarily true. So like for estate planning, we could look at it in 2024 through a particular lens. So let's say 2024, we want to, get back to the basics of estate planning. So maybe the first, surge of the year is let's just review all of your documents and make sure that everything's all lined up. And maybe we, get everything ahead of time and we actually get a copy of their will and we do a beneficiary audit that I know you guys are huge fans of. Yeah. And we actually slow down and take the time to educate clients because maybe we explained how probate worked to them, 6 years ago when they became a client of ours, but we haven't necessarily taken the time to revisit that conversation. And I know I would always make the mistake in my own practice of being like, well, I explained that to you like 8 years ago. How is it that you don't remember every single detail of every single thing that we talked about, right? Like you should remember all of that. So taking that time to revisit the topic and saying like, okay, let's just remember here's not just like, here's what probate is and here's how it works, but then also kind of the sub bullets of, and here's the work that we're doing to help you avoid that. Here's some of the additional changes in legislation or changes in tax code and things that impact how we look at probate or your estate taxes. And then maybe, we have some other things throughout the year. So value adds could look like doing a beneficiary audit between their meetings. And then maybe the fall surge has a slightly different lens that we're looking at estate planning through. So maybe first part of the year was basic review and just making sure all of their paperwork is in alignment, that they've got POAs and they've got all of the stuff that maybe doesn't even necessarily relate to what we do as planners, but as part of the overall picture. And we can actually slow down and make sure they're implementing it. So that's another big thing, that for me is how do we actually ensure that our clients are doing what we say we're going to do. And we don't just give them all this great advice and give them all of this great recommendations only to find out a year or two later that they built the trust, they had that made, but they never actually put anything in it, right? Like how do we actually button up all of those details? So then maybe the fall, keeping with an estate planning lens, maybe between then we're doing a webinar with an estate attorney. Maybe we're doing, something all about charitable gifting and how estate taxes work. And maybe there's some other options. And then leading into a different conversation, still in the estate planning theme. And I'm not saying ignore investments and ignore rates of return and not answer any questions that your clients have. Like still that's part of it. But how do we slow down and educate them and build up to bigger topics and ideas? So another great example would be one of my favorites. I think one of my most successful theme years was talking about income distribution. So the first part of the year, we spent the first, two quarters of the year educating on income distribution strategies. So here's all the different ways as an advisor that we can create income for you in retirement and just teaching them and educating them. Here's why the 4% rule doesn't work, your own opinion.
Sure.
Here's what we do. Here's how we create income. Here's what you've already got in place. And then here's what we're doing as planners to align you for a really great retirement income distribution strategy. Then second half of the year was all about their personal distribution strategy and then educating on the taxation. So revisiting simple things like, what does Social Security taxation look like in retirement? I can't tell you how many times I was meeting with C-level executives, right? Smart people. And we were talking about marginal versus effective rates. And they had that oh crap moment. I did not realize that that's how they work. I didn't understand that the first X number of dollars I made, there was zero tax on it. Then it was this, and then it was this. And when they kind of had that understanding, then it made, well, here's how we want to do things like Roth conversions, or we want to do backdoor Roths. Here's the things that we do as planners to set you up for a very successful retirement distribution strategy, not only from like a safety perspective, but also from a taxation perspective. And for me, this is where we could kind of position ourselves as those indispensable advisors. Like for clients who are in their 40s, yeah, we're still educating them on how RMDs work and what Social Security taxation looks like and what does that mean for your Medicare premium. Even though it didn't matter to them right there in that moment, what we wanted them to know and what we wanted to reinforce is like, hey, here's all the crap that we're thinking about 10, 20 years from now for you. So here's why we're making these suggestions. Here's why we're doing this type of planning. We're thinking about that stuff that doesn't even matter for a couple of decades so that we're making sure that we're positioning you properly. And it was more of like a, hey, we're educating you on these things that we're thinking about. And you don't have to worry about that just yet, but know that we're worried about it and that we're being proactive about creating solutions for that. And then how else can we support that theme throughout the year through different value adds and different, implementing different processes. So like I think about the 8606 thing that you guys are doing right now with RTS, right? Like, oh my gosh, how many times do we tell clients that you should be doing backdoor Roths and then never actually coming back and taking or having the time in our theme or in our process to look at their return and say, did they actually do it correctly, right? Because again, we're making all these recommendations, we have all of these ideas, we're giving them all of these things. And if they're not actually doing it properly and, mistakes are being made, we're not setting them up for the future that we've been talking about and planning for.
Yeah, I think that's great points that you bring up there, Libby, because sometimes we're tempted, as you mentioned with your example of the snorkeling, of just like, I need to go 100 directions.
Right.
Or I need to put it all into one meeting. That's where people say, well, I can't do just a 1 hour meeting because there's too much to cover. Well, sure, there is more to cover than you could ever do in an hour meeting, but even a 6 hour meeting, you wouldn't get to any of it. And so I think I like your idea. If we start the year with this theme, and that's our newsletters are around that, and our client events are around that, and our correspondence around that, and our value add, also provides, and I always love this safety net of I'm making sure every client has been touched on this theme, right? Because if you're doing it sort of one-off, what you have is this risk of like, did we ever get to Bob and Sue? Like, did we ever look at Bob and Sue's? Because they never brought it up, so we never got to it.
Right.
Whereas again, if you're picking this theme, we're going to talk to every single client about these different angles of the estate plan. I know that everybody's got it covered across the board. And we're doing, to your point, we're doing a far better job because we get really good at it when we do it again and again.
Yeah. And we can get so deep in the clients. I think for them, the pivot, at least in my experience and kind of the experience of, the hundreds of advisors that we've kind of coached into shifting their process, when you're going to be asking for a check every single year, if your clients are coming into the meeting, and I just know because this is true for me, right? I can remember sitting there being like, I am bored out of my gourd. I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. And I wanted our clients to feel like, hey, and this was pre-pandemic, right? Like if they're going to take 20 minutes to drive to our office, they're going to sit with me for an hour, and then they're going to take 20 minutes to drive home. Like I didn't want them to be like, well, that was a huge waste of time. I could have looked that up online. Like I wanted to make sure
I could read those statements myself.
Yeah, I could have looked up my rates of return and my allocation. So how do I make sure that we're delivering a lot of value within those meetings? And for us, we found that it was education, and it was slowing it down and going really, really deep and solidifying a client's understanding. And then too, when we would either position a future product or a future sale or a future recommendation, they had the foundation and the background for it. It wasn't like, hey, in the first 10 minutes of the meeting, we taught you about this, and by the end of the meeting, we're asking you to do something and make a major switch or an adjustment or a major change, and you've literally had 45 minutes to process it. It was really more of a build up and making sure that they understood the why behind it. And you just don't have the time to do that in a 45-minute meeting. Or even worse, it could come off super salesy. Like, hey, you need long-term care and here's why. And now here's some solutions for you. And let's get you through underwriting, right? It feels kind of salesy, which nobody wants that.
Yeah, in that case it is. Yeah, and some of those things, like you said, do take time, right? We're using this example of estate planning, which is a great theme. It's not as though even if you theoretically could, you wouldn't want to. Like you're not going to have the attorney sitting there, you're going to draft documents and take care of it all at once, right? Some of these things take some time. And so I like that extending out gives it a place to live. So estate plan would be a theme. Libby, any other examples of themes that come to mind kind of off the top of your head? So if that was your 2024 theme, for example, what would be your 2025 theme? Just as an example.
Well, so I love themes that kind of naturally lead into other themes, right? So maybe we're talking about estate planning and then estate planning taxation. And then that taxation maybe turns into a conversation about charitable giving, which maybe turns into a conversation about their parents and how they're going to be receiving income. And what is, let's look at estate planning through that lens of you inheriting money. And are your parents doing all of these things and bypassing probate and doing all of the things that they should be doing? We have a list of like 50 themes. It could be, let's review all of your protection. And that could be P&C, that can be life insurance, that can be disability, that can be long-term care, having a long-term care plan. Caring for aging parents, we did one year, and that was a phenomenal theme coupled with long-term care. Let's see, there's, taxation.
Yeah, there's so many. No, now we have a decade's worth right now.
Yeah, all the things. There's so many different ways that you can look at financial planning. And then you can come back and look at through the same topic through a slightly different lens.
Well, totally. And you need to, right? So you want to almost have a different lens, because when you come back to estate planning in a few years, you're going to want a different lens, just like you said, so it doesn't become tedious for everybody. And there's always a different way to look at that. So, well, Libby, I really appreciate this idea of themes. It's fun to stretch that out. Sometimes we get, like I said, focused on one surge cycle or one value add cycle. And I love this idea of tying them together. But Libby, how can advisors listening, of course, hopefully they'll go back and listen to your other episode. You've been on the Retirement Tax Services podcast, but you've got your own great podcast. You've been on the Michael Kitz's podcast. You've got your coaching program running, though it's currently full. But how do people learn more about the great work you're doing?
Yeah, well, the best place to start is the Efficient Advisor podcast. So we're a twice a week, podcast all about systems and processes. And I promise it sounds terribly boring, but we do try to make it as fun as humanly possible, and super tangible with takeaways and things that advisors can implement right away. The other place I hang out is the Efficient Advisor community on Facebook. We have about 1,700 advisors, but you're only allowed in if you're cool and willing to share ideas and resources and templates and all the things. And the last place is LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, that's a true story, by the way. I kind of lurk in your Facebook group, and I love to post in there sometimes. And it's a really good community. I think sometimes communities in our industry degrade quickly, and yours is like very fun and informative, a lot of great information there. Yeah,
well, thank you. We work really hard to make sure that it is just an environment that is only advisors and operational people. So we do screen people before they're allowed in. And if you're not fun, we kick you out. No, I'm just kidding. That's not true. But you do need to be fun to come on in.
I love that. I love that. Well, Libby, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you, as always, for sharing your insights with all of the advisor community. And for all of our listeners, until next time, happy planning.